Commander Jake Morrison stared through the main viewing window of the UES horizon as they approached the massive space station. The Centauri trade hub stretched for miles in every direction, with ships of dozens of different designs docking and leaving every few minutes. After 3 years of traveling through space, humanity was finally meeting the galaxy. "First contact protocols are ready, Commander," said Chief Science Officer Lisa Parker from her station. She had spent months learning what little they knew about alien languages and customs. Next to her, Security Chief Ryan Hayes kept his hand near his weapon controls, just in case things went wrong. "Communications are open on all known frequencies," added Communications Officer Amy Carter. Her voice showed excitement mixed with nervousness. Everyone on the ship felt the same way. They were representing all of humanity today. Jake nodded and straightened his uniform. "Send our greeting message. Let them know we come in peace." The response came quickly. A cold, mechanical voice filled the bridge. "Human vessel, you are cleared for docking bay 779. Prepare for customs. Inspection and trade evaluation. Welcome to profitable relations." Jake frowned at the strange greeting. "Trade evaluation? Maybe they're just being practical," Lisa suggested, but she didn't sound convinced. The docking process went smoothly. The horizon settled into the massive bay with room to spare. Jake could see alien workers moving cargo with efficient machines, but nobody seemed excited or curious about meeting a new species. They treated the human ship like any other delivery. A group of tall, thin aliens with silver skin and 4 arms waited at the airlock. Their leader wore expensive-looking robes, covered in glowing symbols. He stepped forward as Jake and his team exited their ship. "I am Chancellor Vex Karoth of the Zephyrian Trade Collective," the alien said in perfect English. "We have been expecting you since your radio signals reached our space. You represent potential profit opportunities." Jake extended his hand in the human greeting gesture. "I'm Commander Jake Morrison, representing Earth and humanity. We're honored to meet you." Vex Karoth looked at the offered hand with confusion, then ignored it completely. "Honor is not a trade commodity. Please follow me to the negotiation chambers." As they walked through the station, Jake noticed something troubling. The aliens they passed looked tired and fearful. Many had visible injuries or wore ragged clothing, but the well-dressed ones like Vex Karoth seemed not to notice them at all. "Chancellor," Jake said carefully, "some of your people look like they need help." "Help is expensive," Vex Karoth replied without looking. "Those who cannot afford protection services accept the risks of their situation." Lisa caught Jake's eye and shook her head slightly. This was not what any of them had expected from an advanced civilization. The negotiation chamber was a cold, metal room with a large table. Vex Karoth activated a holographic display showing trade routes, resource, locations, and profit calculations. "Your species shows promise for labor contracts and military services. We can offer competitive rates for human workers." "We're not here to sell our people," Ryan said firmly. "We want to establish diplomatic relations and learn about the galaxy." Diplomacy. "Without profit is inefficient," Vex Karoth said. "But perhaps we can find mutually beneficial arrangements." Before Jake could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the station. Red lights flashed and automated voices announced an emergency. Vex Karoth touched a device on his wrist and his expression changed. "Minor inconvenience," he said. "Mining station Kepler 12 is under attack by raiders. Standard pirate activity." "How many people are on that station?" Amy asked. "Approximately 8,000 workers and their families." "You have to help them," Lisa said, standing up from the table. Vex Karoth looked puzzled. "Help them do what?" "Fight off the raiders." "Evacuate the civilians, something. That would require deploying security forces at significant cost. The insurance payout for lost workers is more economical than a rescue operation." Jake felt sick. "You're going to let 8,000 people die because it costs too much to save them?" They signed contracts acknowledging occupational hazards. This is standard business practice throughout the galaxy. Ryan was already moving toward the door. "Commander, we have to do something." Jake made a decision that would change everything. "Chancellor, We need to borrow some of your ships. For what purpose? To save those people. Vex Karath's expression showed complete confusion. You would risk your lives and resources for workers who provide you no profit? Yes. This makes no economic sense. Some things are more important than money. The Chancellor stared at Jake for a long moment. Your species is either very stupid or very dangerous. I have not decided which. While Jake's team prepared for an impossible rescue mission, Amy made an important discovery. She had been exploring the station's data networks and found something buried in old files. Ancient records spoke of legendary protectors called the Void Knights. Commander, you need to see this, she said over the communication system. These knights were guardians who protected innocent people across the galaxy. They lived by a code of honor and sacrifice. Jake read the files quickly. The Void Knights had been real, not just legends. They had fought to protect the weak and defend justice wherever they found it. But they had vanished 300 years ago, during something called the Great Silence. What happened to them? Lisa asked. Amy pulled up more records. According to this, they were systematically hunted down and eliminated. Corporate interests considered them bad for business because they interfered with profitable operations, like saving people who should have been left to die, Ryan said grimly. The final record showed a message from the last Void Knight, someone named Sentinel Kale Thara. The translation was difficult, but Amy worked through it word by word. The light will return when hearts remember what it means to shield others from darkness, she read aloud. The galaxy will know its protectors again when courage overcomes profit. Jake looked at his crew. They were preparing to risk their lives for people they had never met, people whose own government had abandoned them to die. It was exactly what these ancient knights would have done. Set course for mining station Kepler-12, he ordered. Commander, Vex Karath said, your behavior is unprecedented in galactic history. No species acts without profit motive. Then maybe it's time the galaxy remembered what it used to be. As the UES Horizon left the trade hub, Jake realized they were not just going to attempt a rescue. They were carrying something the galaxy had lost long ago. The spirit of the Void Knights lived on in humanity's willingness to risk everything for strangers. Behind them, Vex Karath watched their ship disappear into space. For the first time in his long life, he felt something he didn't recognize. Later, he would learn that humans called it shame. On mining station Kepler-12, 8,000 people waited for help that would never come. Their own government had written them off as acceptable losses, but they didn't know that help was coming. Anyway, carried by a species that had never heard of the Void Knights but somehow understood their code perfectly, the galaxy was about to remember what it meant to have protectors again. 6 months had passed since the rescue at mining station Kepler-12. News of what humans had done spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Some called them heroes, others called them fools. But everyone was talking about the strange species that fought without contracts and saved lives without payment. Captain Susan Martinez stood on the bridge of the UES Defender, studying the distress signal that had brought them to the edge of known space. Kepler colony was under attack, and this time the enemy was much worse than simple raiders. How many ships are we facing? She asked her tactical officer. 23 hegemony slave ships, replied Ben Rodriguez, checking his sensors again to make sure. They've got the colony surrounded. Looks like they're preparing to harvest the entire population. Susan felt her jaw tighten. The Hegemony Collective was one of the largest criminal organizations in the galaxy. They captured people from small colonies and sold them as workers to whoever paid the most. Local governments rarely interfered because fighting the hegemony was expensive and dangerous. What about Kepler colony's defenses? Asked Medical Officer Helen Wright from her station. 2 patrol ships and a handful of ground weapons, Ben said. They surrendered an hour ago. The hegemony is already loading civilians onto transport ships. Susan stared at the tactical display. 23 enemy ships against 1 human vessel. Any military academy would call this suicide. But she thought about the message they had received from the colony before communications were cut off. A young girl's voice pleading for someone to help her family. Tactical analysis, Ben. What are our chances? Ben looked uncomfortable. Honestly, Captain, close to zero. Their ships are bigger and they have us outnumbered. Even if we somehow win, we'll probably lose the defender in the process. And if we don't fight? 15,000 people get sold into slavery. Susan nodded slowly. The choice was simple, even if it wasn't easy. All hands, this is the captain. We're going in. Our job is to protect innocent people, and that's exactly what we're going to do. She opened a channel to the Hegemony fleet. This is Captain Susan Martinez of the United Earthship Defender. You will release those civilians immediately and leave this system. The response came from the Hegemony commander, a harsh voice filled with amusement. Human ship, you are outnumbered and outgunned. Withdraw now or be destroyed. Negative. Don't abandon innocent people. Then you will die with them. Susan closed the channel and turned to her crew. She could see fear in their eyes, but also determination. They knew what they were fighting for. Helen, get medical ready for casualties. Ben, target their troop transports first. We need to stop them from taking more civilians. Understood, Captain. The battle began with the defender diving straight into the middle of the Hegemony formation. Susan's plan was risky but simple. Instead of trying to fight all 23 ships at once, she would use the defender's speed and maneuverability to force them to get in each other's way. Ben's targeting was perfect. The first transport ship exploded in a ball of fire, and hundreds of captured civilians escaped in the confusion, but the victory was short-lived. Hegemony fighters swarmed around the defender, their weapons lighting up the darkness of space. Hull breach on Deck 5, reported Engineering Chief Pete Williams, over the communication system. We're venting atmosphere. Seal it off, Susan ordered. How are our weapons? Forward guns are damaged but still working. Missiles are at 60%. The defender shook under enemy fire. Warning lights flashed on every console. But Susan kept her ship moving, dancing between enemy vessels like a fighter pilot in a much larger ship. Every time the Hegemony tried to surround her, she would accelerate through their formation and attack from a new angle. Another transport down, Ben reported. That's 3 ships and maybe 1,000 freed civilians. But the odds were still impossible. The defender was taking heavy damage and more Hegemony ships were arriving every few minutes. Susan realized they might save some of the colonists, but they probably wouldn't survive to see it. Then something unexpected happened. Captain, called Amy Carter from Communications. I'm getting signals from Kepler Colony. The colonists are fighting back. On the main screen, Susan could see small ships launching from the planet's surface. They were civilian vessels, cargo haulers and personal transports that had no business in a space battle. But they were flying straight toward the Hegemony fleet. This is Colony Administrator Jack Thompson, came a voice over the radio. We saw what you're doing for us, Captain Martinez. We're not going to let you fight alone. Susan felt a surge of hope mixed with terror. Mr. Thompson, those are civilian ships. You're not equipped for combat. Maybe not, but we can't stand by while someone dies trying to save us. That wouldn't be right. The colonists' ships were small and lightly armed, but there were dozens of them. They flew in formations that reminded Susan of ancient Earth history, like farmers taking up weapons to defend their homes. Most importantly, they were drawing enemy fire away from the defender. Ben, while they're distracted, target the main command ship. Locked on, Captain. The defender's remaining missiles streaked across space and slammed into the Hegemony flagship. The explosion was visible from the planet's surface. Suddenly, the enemy formation began to fall apart as smaller ships tried to decide whether to keep fighting or retreat. This is Colonel Sarah Williams of the Kepler Defense Force, came another voice. All civilian ships form up on the human vessel. We're going to finish this. What happened next would be talked about for generations. The colonists, inspired by humanity's willingness to die for strangers, fought with a courage that amazed everyone watching. They used their small ships like guided missiles, ramming damaged Hegemony vessels and rescuing civilians from destroyed transports. When it was over, 17 Hegemony ships had been destroyed or captured. The remaining 6 fled the system, leaving behind nearly all of their prisoners. It should have been impossible, But it had happened because people remembered what it meant to protect each other. Susan found herself in the medical bay after the battle, getting treatment for injuries she hadn't noticed during the fighting. Helen Wright was busy with more serious cases, but she took time to check on her captain. "How many did we lose?" Susan asked. "Surprisingly few. 43 dead from our ship, maybe 200 from the colony fleet. But we saved almost 15,000 people." Susan nodded, thinking about the cost. Every death hurt, but she knew they had done the right thing. "Helen, do you think we're changing anything out here?" Helen smiled. "Captain, I've been getting messages from across the galaxy. There are other colonies asking for help, other worlds standing up to criminals and corporations. What we did here, what Commander Morrison did at Kepler 12, it's spreading." Later, Susan stood on the observation deck looking out at Kepler Colony. The planet's lights twinkled in the darkness, and she could see construction ships already working to repair the damage. But more importantly, she could see something else. The colonists had built a monument near their main city. It was a simple, stone structure with words carved in a dozen languages, but the meaning was clear in all of them. "To those who stand guard in the darkness, we remember." Susan didn't know about the ancient Void Knights or their forgotten code, but she understood something important. When good people were willing to risk everything for strangers, it inspired others to be better than they thought possible. Word of the Battle of Kepler Colony spread through every communication network in the galaxy. On distant worlds, young aliens heard the story and wondered why their own governments wouldn't fight for innocent people. On trade stations, workers whispered about the humans who treated protecting others as more important than profit. The galaxy was beginning to remember something it had lost long ago, and humanity was showing them the way back. The emergency meeting of the Syndicate Coalition took place on the luxury space station Haven Prime, far from any planetary government that might interfere. Nexus CEO Thane Korvasek sat at the head of a massive holographic table, his augmented eyes glowing red with anger as he reviewed the latest reports. 17 major corporate operations disrupted in the last month, he said, his voice cold and mechanical. Slave trading down 60%. Protection racket profits at an all-time low. All because of these humans and their ridiculous ideas. About heroism. Trade Princess Yala Ness leaned forward from her position at the table. Her species was naturally beautiful, but surgical enhancements had made her look almost predatory. "The infection is spreading, Korvasek. 3 more worlds have declared themselves humanitarian zones this week. They're refusing to pay tribute or follow standard business practices." Around the table, the most powerful criminals and corporate leaders in the galaxy nodded in agreement. They had built their empires on fear, greed, and the understanding that most people were too weak or scared to fight back. But humanity was changing that equation. "Show them the Hydros report," ordered Mining Consortium Director Vex Thule. A holographic display showed scenes from the ocean world of Hydros. Young Tideborn aliens were working together to rescue survivors from a crashed transport ship. They moved through the dangerous waters without any thought of payment or contracts, risking their lives to save strangers. "The Tideborn haven't shown this kind of cooperative behavior in 2 centuries, Vex Thule explained. "Ever since we convinced them that helping others was economically inefficient. But now they're acting like their ancestors did during the old night period." Korvasek's mechanical fist slammed down on the table. The night period ended for good reasons. Those ancient protectors were bad for business. They interfered with profitable operations and filled people's heads with dangerous ideas about justice and sacrifice. "And now the humans are doing exactly the same thing," added Yala Ness. "Worse, they're inspiring other species to remember what they used to be like." The reports kept coming. On the crystal moon of Shardhome, a young crystalline architect named Zix Mora had begun designing free shelters for homeless refugees. She claimed to be following ancient building traditions that prioritized community welfare over individual profit. On the industrial world of Nexus Prime, worker unions were forming for the first time in decades. They demanded safer working conditions and fair treatment, ideas that would have been unthinkable before humans arrived in the galaxy. "The situation is becoming critical," said Security Chief Balcron. Our psychological control systems depend on populations believing that cooperation and self-sacrifice are signs of weakness. If that changes, our entire economic model collapses. Korvasek stood up, his augmented body towering over the others. Then we eliminate the source of the infection. I'm authorizing Operation Final Profit. Every human ship, every human colony, every human individual will be destroyed. We'll make their species an example of what happens when you interfere with legitimate business. Meanwhile, on New Geneva Station, Colonel Nick Patterson was dealing with his own crisis. Intelligence reports showed massive syndicate fleet movements heading toward human territories. They were coming with enough firepower to destroy every human presence in the galaxy. "How long do we have?" he asked his intelligence officer, Staff Sergeant Claire Johnson. "Maybe 2 weeks before they reach our outer colonies. 3 weeks before they get to the main human settlements." Nick looked at the tactical displays showing syndicate forces. The numbers were staggering. Hundreds of warships, thousands of fighters, enough ground troops to conquer entire solar systems. Humanity had maybe 50 ships total, and most of those were exploration vessels barely equipped for combat. "Sir," said Lieutenant Pete Williams from the communications station, "we're getting incoming messages from across the galaxy. Dozens of alien groups asking if they can help." Nick frowned. "Help how?" "Military assistance, supply shipments, intelligence about syndicate movements. Some of them are even offering to send their own ships to fight alongside us." The first ship to arrive was a surprise. It was a Tideborne vessel from Hydros, sleek and designed for underwater operations but equipped with space combat systems. The captain introduced herself as Reef Singer Akunala. "We heard about the syndicate threat," she said during their communication. "My people remember stories of the ancient Void Knights. They never fought alone. Neither should you." More ships began arriving over the next few days. Crystalline engineers brought vessels equipped with advanced shield technologies. Young Zephyrians flew outdated fighters that their grandparents had used during the last honest war their species had fought. But the most important arrivals weren't ships at all. Dr. Grace Murphy was working in her research lab when she made a discovery that changed everything. She had been studying genetic samples from various alien species trying to understand how they had evolved. What she found was shocking. "Colonel Patterson, you need to see this immediately," she called over the communication system. Nick found her in the lab staring at holographic displays of DNA sequences and brain scans. "What am I looking at, Grace?" "Evidence of artificial genetic modification," she said. "Every major species in the galaxy has been altered. Specific genes related to empathy, cooperation, and protective instincts have been suppressed or removed. Entirely." Nick felt cold. "Suppressed by who?" "Based on the modification patterns, I'd say it happened gradually over the past 3 centuries. Right around the time the Void Knights disappeared. Someone has been systematically breeding the capacity for heroism out of entire species. The syndicates." "It makes sense," Grace continued. "Populations that can't feel empathy for each other are easier to control. People who don't have protective instincts won't stand up for their neighbors. But here's the interesting part. The modifications are breaking down." She showed him brain scans from some of their alien allies. Exposure to human behavior is somehow reactivating dormant genetic sequences. These aliens are literally remembering how to be heroes again at a biological level. The implications were staggering. The syndicates hadn't just killed the Void Knights. They had tried to eliminate the very capacity for knighthood from the galaxy's population. But they had failed, because the genes were still there, waiting to be awakened. Lieutenant Commander, Paul Mitchell arrived at New Geneva Station with the most important discovery of all. He had been leading an expedition to restore the ancient Citadel of Stars, the legendary headquarters of the Void Knights. "The Citadel isn't just a building," he reported to Nick. "It's a massive archive containing the complete records and training methods of the original Knights. Everything they knew about protecting innocent people, organizing defenses, inspiring others to fight for justice. It's all there. And you found human teams already working to restore it? Not just humans. Young aliens from dozens of species, all working together to bring the old knowledge back to life. They're calling themselves Knight Aspirants. Nick realized they weren't just facing a military threat. This was a war for the soul of galactic civilization. The syndicates wanted to maintain a universe where cruelty and greed ruled everything, but humanity had accidentally started a revolution by showing that another way was possible. The final piece of bad news came from Admiral Frank Cooper on Earth. Nick, our deep space monitors show the syndicate main fleet heading directly for Terra Nova. They're not just trying to eliminate human colonies, they're targeting our new peacekeeping academy. If they destroy that facility, they'll kill thousands of the young aliens who've come there to learn about becoming protectors. Nick looked at his staff. They were preparing for the most important battle in galactic history, and they were still hopelessly outnumbered. But as he watched alien and human officers working side by side, planning the defense of ideals that most of the galaxy had forgotten, he felt something he hadn't expected. Hope. "Send a message to all syndicate forces," he ordered. "Tell them we received their ultimatum. Tell them our answer is no." The syndicate coalition fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Terra Nova system, like a storm cloud blocking out the stars. Admiral Korvasek stood on the bridge of his flagship, the corporate dreadnought Profit Margin, watching his sensors count enemy contacts. "How many human ships are defending the system?" he asked his tactical officer. 17 warships, sir, plus maybe 40 civilian vessels that appear to be armed with improvised weapons. Korvasek smiled coldly. "And how many ships do we have?" 233 combat vessels, sir, plus support ships and troop transports. "Excellent odds. Begin the attack. I want every human installation in this system reduced to debris within 6 hours." But as the syndicate fleet moved toward Terra Nova, something unexpected appeared on their sensors. Ships were jumping into the system from every direction. Not human ships, but vessels from dozens of different alien species. "Sir," the tactical officer said nervously, "we're detecting tide-borne assault ships, crystalline defense cruisers, and what appears to be a full Zephyrian battle squadron." "Impossible. Those species haven't cooperated militarily in centuries. They're broadcasting on all frequencies, sir. The message is the same in every language. We stand with humanity. We remember what it means to protect the innocent." Korvasek felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. Fear. Not of dying, but of losing control. These aliens were supposed to be incapable of working together. The genetic modifications should have made such cooperation impossible. On Terra Nova's surface, General Robert Quinn coordinated the defense from his command bunker deep underground. The planet held the new Galactic Peacekeeping Academy, where thousands of young aliens had come to learn about becoming protectors. If the syndicates captured or destroyed this place, the growing movement toward heroism might die with it. "General," reported Colonel Sandra Bell from her position at the communications center, "all defense platforms are online. The orbital stations are ready for combat. What about civilian evacuation?" "That's where we have a problem, sir. The alien students at the academy are refusing to leave. They say they came here to learn how to fight for others, and this is their first real test." Quinn closed his eyes for a moment. These young aliens were brave, but they weren't soldiers. Most had never been in real combat. But he also understood their point. How could they call themselves future protectors if they ran away when protection was needed most? Let them stay if they choose to, but keep them away from the front lines. The first wave of syndicate ships reached Terra Nova's outer defenses 30 minutes later. Commander Steve Carter led the orbital defense platforms in a desperate holding action, his weapons firing continuously at the endless stream of enemy vessels. "Platform 7 is taking heavy damage," he reported over the communication system. "We're losing shields and our main guns are overheating." "Hold your position as long as possible," Quinn ordered. "Every minute you buy us saves more lives on the surface." The platforms fought bravely, but they were designed to handle raiders and small attack fleets, not a full-scale invasion. One by one, they began to fall. Commander Carter's platform was among the last to go down, taking 3 syndicate cruisers with it in a final explosion that lit up the darkness of space. On the planet's surface, Major Linda Jackson led evacuation efforts as syndicate dropships began landing near the major cities. Her teams worked frantically to move civilians to underground shelters while ground forces prepared to meet the enemy. "Major," called Sergeant Bill Rogers over the radio, "we've got syndicate troops moving toward the academy. Looks like 2 full battalions with heavy armor support. Copy that. All defensive units converge on the academy. We don't let them get to those kids." The battle for the academy became the most important fight of the war. Captain Roger Adams led a squadron of human fighters in desperate attacks against syndicate bombers, knowing that every enemy ship that got through might kill hundreds of students. His fighter took heavy damage during a head-on attack against a bomber formation. With his engines failing and his weapons nearly depleted, he made a decision that would be remembered forever. He turned his ship toward the largest bomber and accelerated. "This is Captain Adams to all units," he said calmly over the radio. "Remember what we're fighting for. The future is worth any sacrifice." His fighter slammed into the bomber at full speed, creating an explosion that destroyed both ships and saved the academy from the worst of the bombing attack. But the ground battle was still going badly. Syndicate forces had superior numbers and equipment. They pushed closer to the academy buildings where frightened alien students huddled in reinforced shelters. That's when something remarkable happened. The alien students refused to stay hidden. Led by Knight Aspirant Akunala and Knight Aspirant Chris Thompson, they organized themselves into defensive units. They had been studying the ancient Void Knight combat techniques, and now they put that knowledge to use. "We didn't come here to hide when people need protection," Akunala told the human officers who tried to keep them in the shelters. "We came here to learn how to be heroes. Today we learn." The young aliens fought with a courage that amazed even their instructors. They used teamwork and clever tactics to overcome their lack of experience. More importantly, they fought for each other and for the civilians they were protecting. Watching them, the human soldiers felt something they had never experienced before. They were seeing the rebirth of the Void Knights, not just as a human concept, but as something that could unite the entire galaxy. Dr. Nancy Rodriguez worked in a field hospital near the fighting, treating wounded soldiers and civilians without regard for their species or which side they had originally fought for. When syndicate soldiers were brought to her medical station, she treated them with the same care as her own people. "Doctor," asked a wounded Zephyrian soldier, "why are you helping enemy troops?" "Because healing isn't about sides," she replied. "It's about protecting life wherever we find it." The siege lasted for 3 days. Syndicate forces controlled most of the planet's surface, but they couldn't break the defenses around the academy. Every attack was met by determined resistance from humans and aliens fighting side by side. On the 3rd night, something incredible happened. Ancient systems throughout the academy began activating on their own. Technology that had been dormant for centuries suddenly came online. Defense shields that no one knew existed started protecting the buildings. Weapon systems began targeting enemy forces with impossible accuracy. "What's happening?" General Quinn asked his technical staff. "Sir, it appears that the academy was built on the site of an old Void Knight stronghold. The ancient technology is responding to the presence of people who truly understand the Knight Code." The tide of battle began to turn. Syndicate forces found themselves facing not just superior technology but something more important. They were fighting people who believed in something greater than themselves. Admiral Korvasek watched from orbit as his ground forces began retreating. For the first time in his long career, he was facing an enemy that couldn't be defeated by superior firepower or ruthless tactics. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "we're receiving messages from our own troops. Some of the syndicate soldiers are refusing to continue the attack. They're saying they won't fire on medical stations or schools anymore." Korvasek realized with growing horror that the infection was spreading to his own forces. His soldiers were beginning to remember what it felt like to have a conscience. The Battle of Terra Nova was becoming more than a military conflict. It was the moment when the galaxy chose between 2 different ways of living. And slowly, one choice at a time, the galaxy was choosing hope over fear, protection over profit, heroism over selfishness. The surrender came not with fanfare or formal ceremonies, but with a simple message broadcast across all frequencies. Admiral Korvasek's voice, once cold and mechanical, now carried something that shocked everyone who heard it. "All syndicate, Forces, cease operations immediately. Return to base and await further orders. On Terra Nova, General Robert Quinn stood in the ruins of what had once been the Academy's main hall. The building was damaged but still standing, protected by ancient shields that no one fully understood. Around him, human and alien soldiers worked together to help the wounded and clear debris. "General," said Colonel Sandra Bell, approaching, with a communication device, "we're getting reports from across the galaxy. Syndicate forces everywhere are laying down their weapons. Some are even switching sides." Quinn looked through the broken windows at the alien students who had fought so bravely to defend their new home. Many were injured, but they were all ready, planning how to rebuild. They had proven something important during the battle. The spirit of the Void Knights could live in anyone willing to protect others. "What changed Korvasek's mind?" Quinn asked. Sandra handed him a data pad showing video footage from the Syndicate flagship. One of our medics, Dr. Nancy Rodriguez, was captured during the battle. Instead of interrogating her, they brought her wounded Syndicate soldiers to treat. She saved the life of Korvasek's own nephew, a young officer who had been badly injured. The footage showed Nancy working frantically to save the young Syndicate soldier, using her own blood for a transfusion when medical supplies ran low. She had risked her life for an enemy without hesitation, just as she would for any patient. Korvasek watched the whole thing, Sandra continued. According to our intelligence sources, he kept asking his staff why a human would die to save someone who had been trying to kill her. Nobody could give him an answer that made sense in corporate terms. 3 months later, Commander Jake Morrison stood in the restored Citadel of Stars, looking out at the incredible sight before him. The ancient Void Knight headquarters had been rebuilt by volunteers from dozens of species, all working together without payment or contracts. They had come because they wanted to be part of something greater than themselves. The first graduation ceremony of the New Knight Academy was about to begin. 500 young beings from across the galaxy had completed their training and were ready to take the sacred oath of protection. They represented every major species and many minor ones, united by their commitment to defending the innocent. "Knight Commander Morrison," said Knight Aspirant Aquinala, approaching in her new ceremonial armor. "The graduates are ready for the oath ceremony." Jake smiled at the young Tideborn who had fought so bravely at Terra Nova. She now wore the silver and blue colors of the new Knights, symbols that had been redesigned to honor both the ancient traditions and the modern alliance between species. "How are they feeling?" Jake asked. "Nervous but determined. Many of them lost friends during the war. They want to make sure no one else has to go through what they experienced." The ceremony took place in the Citadel's Great Hall, a massive chamber that could hold thousands of people. Representatives from governments across the galaxy had come to witness this historic moment. Even some former Syndicate leaders were present, including Admiral Korvasek himself. Admiral Frank Cooper, now serving as the first human member of the Galactic Council, delivered the keynote address. His words carried across the hall and were broadcast to every inhabited world in the galaxy. "We gather today not to celebrate military victory, but to honor a more important triumph," he said, "the victory of conscience over profit, of protection over exploitation, of hope over fear. The galaxy didn't need humanity to save it. It needed us to remember what salvation looks like." One by one, the new Knights came forward to take their oath. They represented a new generation that had learned to value heroism over personal gain. Among them were former Syndicate soldiers who had switched sides during the war, their genetic modifications reversed by the medical breakthrough Dr. Grace Murphy had developed. Captain Susan Martinez, now bearing the title of Knight Captain, administered the oath to her group of graduates. Her own ship, the UES Defender, had been rebuilt and now served as a mobile training platform for new Knights. "Do you swear to protect the innocent, defend the weak, and stand guard against those who would harm others?" she asked. "We swear," came the unified response from hundreds of voices speaking dozens of different languages. "Do you promise to serve without thought of personal gain? To risk your safety for the safety of others? And to remember that true strength comes from protecting those who cannot protect themselves?" "We promise," Jake felt a deep sense of satisfaction as he watched the ceremony. The galaxy was changing in ways that no one could have predicted. Crime rates were dropping as more worlds established their own night chapters. Corporate exploitation was becoming difficult as populations refused to accept treatment that violated basic dignity. Most importantly, young people across the galaxy were choosing careers in protection and service rather than profit and exploitation. But the transformation wasn't complete, and Jake knew it might never be. Princess Yalanes had escaped capture and was still operating in the outer systems, leading a small group of die-hard corporate loyalists who refused to accept the new order. They launched occasional attacks against night facilities and tried to restart the old exploitation systems. "Night Commander," said Night Captain Chris Thompson, approaching after the ceremony. "We've received reports of raider attacks in the Kepler system. 3 ships have gone missing in the past week." Jake nodded. "Probably Yalanes and her followers. Assign a patrol squadron to investigate. And Chris, make sure they understand. We're not there to destroy the raiders if we can avoid it. We're there to protect the innocent and offer the raiders a chance to choose a better path." This had become the new Night philosophy. Unlike the old galaxy, where problems were solved with overwhelming force, the Knights tried to find solutions that saved everyone when possible. Many former criminals had joined their ranks after being given second chances. Dr. Karen Foster had established medical stations throughout the galaxy, providing free treatment based on the ancient Void Knight healing traditions. Her work had become a model for how advanced civilizations should care for their most vulnerable members. Former corporate executives now volunteered at her clinics, learning that helping others could be more satisfying than earning profits. The ceremony concluded with the lighting of the Eternal Beacon, a symbolic flame that would burn at the Citadel, as long as the Knights maintained their watch. As the light filled the Great Hall, Jake thought about how far they had all come. 6 months ago, the galaxy had been ruled by fear and greed. Innocent people suffered, while those with power looked the other way. Corporate interests decided who lived and who died based on profit calculations. The very idea of heroism was considered foolish or primitive. Now young beings from across the galaxy were choosing to dedicate their lives to protecting others. Governments were being held accountable for the welfare of their citizens. The genetic modifications that had suppressed empathy and cooperation were being reversed, allowing entire species to rediscover their capacity for goodness. As the new Knights prepared to depart for their first assignments, Jake made his own final log entry about humanity's role in the transformation. "We didn't bring knighthood to the galaxy," he wrote. "We simply reminded the galaxy that it had never really died. It had only been sleeping, waiting for someone to prove that honor, courage, and sacrifice still matter. The age of corporate dominance is ending, replaced by something humanity helped the galaxy remember. The understanding that true strength comes not from power over others, but from the willingness to protect those who cannot protect themselves." Outside the Citadel, the first patrol ships of the new Night Order launched into space, carrying their crews toward distant systems where protection was needed. The galaxy would never be perfect, but it would never again forget what it meant to have guardians watching over the innocent. The Knights had returned, not as conquerors, but as protectors, and they would stand watch for as long as there were those who needed defending.